we like to call it the Supernatural Hour. And now, our hosts.
Welcome to Supernatural Hour. This is Raven.
This is Tim.
This is Dawn.
And we have a really fun show for you today. One of my favorite things, it is going to be about Tower of London. So, Tower of London. And before we started the podcast, I chatted with both Tim and Dawn, and neither of you have been to Tower of London, but I have. Tower of London, I actually went there, I think it was in 2004, so it's been a while. Some of my memory of me personally being there is a little bit murky. I remember that it was a little closer to downtown than I imagined. I always thought it would be kind of off in the countryside, but it's just right there in downtown London. And by downtown London, I don't know if it's downtown London, but it was just right in the city area. And it was a lot shorter than I imagined, because when you say Tower of London, I don't know about you, but when you say tower, I'm thinking something, a gazillion stories tall and towering over you.
It was built in like 1060.
The word towering, the Tower of London. But
see, I thought the same thing. I thought Tower of London. I thought it was just like a tower. I was wrong.
Right, it's this whole big complex. It's so when William the Conqueror built it, he did build kind of the castle, and then he said people might come and try to fight me because I'm William the Conqueror. And so then he built, he turned it into a fortress, less of a castle / palace and more of a fortress. So, there's the wall around it, and then there's several buildings inside. So in a way, it was smaller than I thought vertically, but it was bigger than I thought horizontally. The other thing that I noticed about it is it's right by Tower Bridge. Seriously, there's London Bridge, and then there's the Tower of London. They're like neighbors. But did you know that the original, I'm gonna go off of Tower of London for just 1 second. Tower Bridge, do you know where the original London Bridge is?
Lake Havasu.
I'm not sure. I heard it fell down.
It did not.
Oh, the nursery rhyme lied to me.
Falling down. Well, actually, it was falling down.
That's why they moved it to Lake Havasu.
Which is why they moved it, because it's dry. And so the guy, I didn't write down his name, but the guy said, you should move it to Lake Havasu because it's dry and arid and it won't rot and crumble. And they laughed. Ha, that's funny. And he says, no, seriously. And so he bought it for, I think it was $2.6 million, and they shipped it over here, rock by rock. They disassembled it, shipped it over, and reassembled it. So if you want to see the original London Bridge, it is in Lake Havasu, Arizona.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Totally nowhere near London.
No.
That's quite the feat. What year did they move that?
1967, I think.
Okay, then. That's what I think of when I think Tower or London Bridges. I'm like, let's move it to Arizona.
Exactly. So if you've ever been to Lake Havasu and you saw the bridge, that's actually the original London Bridge. There's a new London Bridge. I haven't seen the original one, but I've seen the new one. So, Tower of London. They say it's the most haunted place in London, and London is a pretty haunted place. But before we get into the ghost part of it, let's talk a little bit about the history. We've already talked about how it was a fortress built by William the Conqueror. A lot of people don't realize this, but he was kind of a big deal as far as shaping how Britain is now. Just with how he laid out things. And so he was a big deal. London Tower is his tower, so London Tower is actually quite a big deal. And for almost 1,000 years, it hosted prisoners of different levels. They had some very high-profile prisoners there. They had, some more common prisoners there. The more high-profile prisoners, while they were there, they could actually go out and, get some air. They were able to have servants even. So the prisoners like Anne Boleyn or Lady Jane Grey, who actually was the Queen of England for a very short time. Kind of some real-life Game of Thrones going on in England, as you're all aware. So, a whole lot of stuff. But the things that they would be imprisoned for were, treason. Even some of it was made-up treason. Anne Boleyn, for example, she was imprisoned. She was charged by her husband, King Henry VIII, of adultery and incest. He accused her of sleeping with her brother.
Yeah, George, I believe his name was.
Mm-hmm.
That is on my list of the 8 most famous hauntings, I guess, if you will, at the Tower of London.
But it was not true. He just wanted to marry somebody else. But that's what she was in prison for. People were also imprisoned for just some petty crimes, being in debt, or, let's see, I already said treason, but just a myriad of things. Oh, my favorite one was confrontational words in Parliament. And I thought, good heavens, if we did that now, all of Congress would be imprisoned.
Especially the Parliament now in Great Britain. That gets really raucous, where the U.S. Senate and House is quite mild compared to how crazy they get in Parliament.
Right.
Well, and another person that was imprisoned, kind of a famous person, many people have probably heard of. If you've ever seen the movie V for Vendetta, it's kind of reenacts a little bit about this guy who tried to blow up Parliament, more or less, or the House of the Lords.
It was a guy?
Guy Fawkes.
Yeah, a guy.
There was a guy.
There was a guy.
Yeah, Guy Fawkes was actually imprisoned in the tower and tortured there for trying to blow up Parliament, basically.
Right. There's another fellow, and I didn't think that this fellow was real. I thought he was made up. But a man named Thomas More. He was actually a former counselor of King Henry VIII, and I think that he became a saint. I think they sainted him for some reason. And here's where my knowledge of this comes in. If you've ever seen the movie The Saint with Val Kilmer, back when he was hot, not now, in that movie he takes on saint names, and one of the names he uses is Thomas More. So I don't know if this is the same Thomas More, but there is a saint named Thomas More. Anyway, we'll pretend like it's him because they make me feel better. So there's all these 1,000 years of...
So this may or may not be historically accurate.
That little part, the Thomas More part, you might want to do your research, because I obviously did not.
Thomas Becket was there also. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury, I believe the Archbishop of the Church.
Yeah, pretty much.
Henry VIII had him killed.
Yeah, pretty much back in that time, if King Henry VIII didn't like you, you were probably going to go to prison. So 1,000 years of prisoners, right? And if there's prisoners, torture was very, very common. There was actually a Jesuit priest there. His name was John Gerard. And he actually lived through the torture. He was one of the few that lived through. And I didn't read the actual story. It said it was not for the faint of heart to read the actual story. But what little I did read about his actual story, they would have, part of the torture was periods of hanging, where they'd hang them, but not to death. They'd just hang them until they were almost dead. And then they'd unhang them and revive them and then do it again. So that sounds like that was tons of fun.
Well, I think this is, you said, we were talking about John Gerard, right?
Yes.
So I believe this is a quote from him, I think. But it says they put my wrist into iron gauntlets and ordered me to climb 2 or 3 wicker steps. My arms were then lifted up, and an iron bar was passed through the rings of one gauntlet, then through the staple and rings of the second gauntlet. This was done. When that was done, they fastened the bar with a pin to prevent it slipping, and then removed the wicker steps and left me hanging by my hands and arms fastened above my head. So that was just one of the forms of torture they did to this one particular gentleman.
Yeah. So they said that while they were there, not only was there torture, but there were about 400 executions while they were there. Most of them were beheadings, but they had hangings. They had people were drawn and quartered, people were shot, and people were burned at the stake. And the shooting was more of a recent thing. The last execution that happened inside the tower was in 1747, and it was Lord Lovat. He was a Jacobite, and this would have been during the Jacobite Rebellion when Scotland was trying to break away from England. And so a few of you know, I play bagpipes. There's actually a tune called Lord Lovat's Lament, and I know it. I could play it for you, but I'm not gonna. At least not right now. And so, yeah, so he was beheaded in 1747. That was the last beheading inside the tower.
I was just going to say, an interesting thing about the beheadings and those kinds of things as opposed to the hangings, it was a higher form of execution. It was for the more noble people because it was more like being killed in battle, which was an interesting side note. You know, I mean, for your common riffraff, you just got, hung by a rope. But if you were highly born, highly placed, or a highly wanted political prisoner, oftentimes they were beheaded because it was more like a military
So they could die with
kind
more
of death,
honor.
a little more honor.
Right. Well, and then along those same lines, it was the nobility and some of the higher class prisoners actually got to have their executions private. Back then they didn't have Plex and Netflix and, your games, and so when there was
Wait, what?
I know, really weird, huh?
Netflix wasn't always around?
I know.
That's probably going to go away soon, too.
I love Netflix.
Anyways, sorry.
But if there was an execution, people went. It's like, woo, execution, let's go. So it was quite the thing.
You get up early and make a day of it.
Yeah, take a picnic and take the kids and get good seats. But the last execution that happened at the Tower of London was by firing squad in 1941. It was a German spy by the name of Joseph Jacobs. Executions there as recent as 1941.
So was that within the tower, or was that at the tower? I think they call it Tower Hill.
So that would have been
where they do the
so that would have been within the grounds, because you can imagine this place as being a couple blocks square, roughly, from my memory, and so inside the tower would be a little bit more. You can't see my hands. A little more intimate setting, but this would have been within the walls.
Okay.
Outside where it was more public.
Yeah,
but still within the walls of the complex.
And as I remember, I think they called it Tower Hill, and it's where they had kind of the big ruckus public executions.
Yep.
So they could get more people to be able to view it.
Right. Oh, and I just found my list of what they were executed for. So treason against the king, and the king, King Henry VIII, he could make up treason. If you were a Catholic, you could be executed for that, because they were very much into being Protestant during this time. Scandalous words in Parliament, which I thought was funny. Scandalous words. Murder, desertion.
What exactly is a scandalous word? Did they give any examples?
They did not, which made me sad, because I would like to know what was considered scandalous back then.
Enough to get you killed.
Apparently.
Yep. Rioting and extreme cruelty, which I think is ironic. You can get imprisoned for extreme cruelty, but yet you'll get drawn and quartered, which also seems like extreme cruelty. So that seemed to me to be a little hypocritical, but hey, I don't make the rules.
Somebody did.
Sounds like a fun time.
Some mean people lived, ruled that castle.
All the above.
All the above.
So,
I mean, it was a fortress. They fortified the crap out of that place to keep invaders from coming out. I mean, it's built two sides of it. You have the River Thames, I believe. Is it? Thames?
The River Thames.
The River Thames on two sides of it. So, I mean, you've already got two sides that are very well protected. And then the other two sides, they built, I believe there's an outer wall and then an inner wall before you actually get to the actual tower and the castle and whatnot.
Right. So within the tower, there's a couple of interesting things. There's a building that houses the crown jewels, and they're really cool. You can go and visit them. They get cleaned once a year. They get cleaned every January, so they're probably being cleaned as we speak. So if you go there anytime in the next little bit, they'll be super duper sparkly. But they said that there is $32 billion worth of treasure stored in that building. There's also a whole bunch of armaments. You go in and you can just see, like on the ceiling, just swords and knives and spears and just all sorts of stuff. It's fascinating. The other thing they have on the grounds, and this I find, I don't know why, but I just find this super fascinating, is I think it came about in Charles II's reign, but there was a prophecy saying that as long as there were always 6 ravens, that speaks to me too, on the grounds, that the monarchy would be safe and stable, and if any of those crows ever left, then the monarchy would fall. So we definitely don't want the British monarchy to fall. Maybe there's people out there that do, but I'm fine. So they always have a flock of crows on the grounds at all times. Crows, ravens.
Corvins.
Cravens?
Corvins.
Okay.
The whole family is, I think, called Corvins.
Oh, okay.
So and they have protectors. They've got raven masters. How does that sound?
Sounds like Game of Thrones.
Raven masters that take care of these crows. And when I was there, we were actually talking with one of the beef eaters. Oh, stop. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I have to live with this every day.
What's your name?
I know. Beef eaters.
Beefeaters.
I was talking with one of the beefeaters, and he's actually the person that told me about this this thing that they
Tradition?
have, the tradition with the ravens.
So what exactly is a beefeater for those that don't know?
We will get to that.
Okay.
We will get to that in just a second, because that's interesting as well. I just find Tower of London fascinating. I could talk about it
Yeah, I
all
started
day.
watching some documentaries, and I actually went to Peaches afterwards, and I said, I want to go to London now.
Oh, London's fascinating. So anyway, they actually clip the wings of these ravens so that they don't fly away. So they kind of have to stay there. They can't really get away. So beefeaters, what are they? They're the guards of the Tower of London, and they're called yeomen. Actually, they're yeomen that are called beefeaters. And you've seen them with the poofy hats and the poofy pantaloons, you know, kind of the quintessential medieval-y looking
Guards.
And I don't know why they're called beefeaters, other than maybe they eat beef.
Maybe.
But here's the interesting thing about them. Their uniforms are $9,000 apiece, and they have been active since the Middle Ages, and they carry on traditions that they've carried on since the Middle Ages. So a lot of the things they do are things that they've been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years. In order to become a yeoman beefeater, you have to have served 22 years in the armed forces of Britain to qualify to even become one of them. And one of their duties now is to help keep an eye on the ravens. They also welcome guests. They act as tour guides. They've got other duties, but I didn't really get into that because I was more interested in the ghost stories. But if you're interested in the yeoman beefeaters, please look them up because they are actually pretty cool.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting in one of the documentaries we were watching, one of the beefeaters was talking to the host, and he said that, you know, the sentries there at the tower, you know, stay very still and hold their things, but he says if you want to see them move, just cross that line.
Oh, I bet. Here we go.
And the guy said, no, I think I will. He said, good choice.
Yes.
See, in my case, though, if you want to see me move, just open a box of donuts. I will run right to you.
For me, it'd be shoes. Just say there's a shoe sale. I'm there. So, I think that brings us to ghosts.
Yeah, that does bring us into ghosts. So what I did find was there was 8 different ghosts that are kind of the most popular ghosts there at the Tower of London.
So I do have to tell you, so, you know, kind of when we first got into this, I think one of our first podcasts way back when was, you know, how did we, as the hosts of the show, kind of get interested in it. And I don't know that I really have a defining moment, but I do know that one of my early paranormal things that really made me say, I think this is an interesting field. Do you remember in grade school when you get the Scholastic book orders?
I loved those.
They're awesome.
I don't think, do they still do those?
They still do those.
That's awesome.
It's still a thing. So one of the books that I would get, because my mom and dad would let me get 1 or 2 books, and back then they were like 95 cents a piece. But one of the books I got was, and I don't know if it was only ghosts from the Tower of London, or if it was just a bunch of ghost stories, and some of them were from the Tower of London. But the Anne Boleyn ghost story is one of the very first ones I read, and I just remember thinking, this is really cool. I want to see a ghost someday. So there you go.
Anne Boleyn is definitely one that I'll cover a little bit more. I know we already talked about her just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But the way this list goes is based on the order or the year that they died. So starting with the first one, we have King Henry the VI. Now, he was the only child of Henry V, and he was supposed to inherit the English and French thrones. But this is during the War of Roses, and he was imprisoned by the House of York at the Tower of London. Initial reports claimed that he died brokenhearted of illness on May 21st in 1471. The more likely truth alleges that Richard of York's son Edward seized the throne after the Battle of Tewkesbury and called for Henry VI's assassination. Henry was stabbed to death as he knelt in prayer in the Wakefield Tower. Now, every year on the anniversary of his death, it is said that he appears pacing around the exact spot where he was murdered. He then disappears at the last stroke of midnight.
Yep. Now, I could have this wrong. So if I have this wrong, don't email me mean emails. I'm pretty much just going off my memory. And most of my royalty information comes from reading Barbara Cartland novels in college. So bear with me here, okay? But if you look at the hierarchy, there's the Queen. The person that inherits the throne is the Prince of Wales. So nowadays it would be Prince Charles. The next son in line is the Duke of York. So in modern times, Andrew is the Duke of York, because we all know Fergie, she's the Duchess of York, so see how that works. So you're going to hear, in these ghost stories, you're going to hear a lot of, this person was imprisoned by the House of York. So this is where the whole Game of Thrones comes in. It's the younger brother that doesn't inherit, that's trying to knock off the older brother who does inherit, and it's literally a Game of Thrones, a real-life Game of Thrones.
Well, sometimes it's an uncle, like in this next one.
Exactly.
This is the tale of the two princes, I guess the tale. They were said to have died in 1483. It says, when Richard III seized the crown in 1483, he imprisoned his two nephews, Edward V and Richard the Duke of York, in the Tower of London. By the end of the year, no one saw the two nephews anymore. Like, they used to see them kind of wandering around the tower. They had servants and whatnot. Eventually the servants kind of disappeared. Eventually the kids disappeared.
Yeah, no, they were just poof.
What's fascinating is still to this day, no one actually knows what happened to the kids.
Right, but there's a but.
But it is believed that they were murdered, so they wouldn't be able to claim the throne, because technically Edward V was next in line for the throne once he came of age. His uncle obviously didn't want that to happen, so they said the theory is that his uncle had them killed and actually buried them in the stairs of the tower. They weren't found until about 200 years later in 1674. At the time, I believe it was King Charles, he had ordered a royal burial for the remains at Westminster Abbey. Today, it's said that the specters of the two have been seen as what is known as the Bloody Tower. It says they are said to be wearing their white nightshirts. They have also been seen playing on the battlements, and there's also been reports of them laughing throughout the halls and on the grounds.
All right, so I find that interesting because they say that no one's entirely sure that those bones are even theirs, but in 1671, King Charles isn't going to have, DNA testing that he can do.
Now, one of the documentaries I was watching actually said, I believe it was 1930-something, they actually brought up the remains of Richard III and did some scientific studies on them. However, those remains that are currently on display, or not on display, but there's like a coffin
Right.
Where the remains are, they've never been allowed to be exhumed and have any scientific studies done on them. So there's no actual proof that those bones are the remains of the two princes, but that is the theory that that's who those are.
Well, and it seems pretty, to me it seems pretty clear-cut. I wouldn't, bet my life on 100% that's who it is, but, what are the odds of finding two, male adolescent skeletons together
in a building where
two adolescent brothers went missing? Yeah, it just seems a little obvious to me. I could be wrong, but I vote it's them.
I would probably agree with you. It's, what are the odds of two kids being buried in the stairs, like you said? So, next one we've talked a little bit about her already. This is Anne Boleyn, who died in 1536. Now, she was the second wife of Henry VIII, and she is the most famous of all the ghosts in the Tower of London. Like you said earlier, she was accused of adultery and incest, and she was beheaded for this. Shortly before...
Why was she really beheaded, though?
Because Henry VIII wanted to get it on with someone else.
Exactly.
So Henry VIII, actually, he was looking for a male heir.
Yeah.
And Anne had failed to give birth to any sons, so he came up with these claims and had her beheaded.
Right, because back in the day, they couldn't get divorced.
Nope. Not until you declared a new religion.
Which is how the Church of England came to be.
But shortly before she was executed, she actually told the crowd not to blame her husband, who had invented the charges, like we said, so he could remarry.
Right.
Now, she's usually seen near the site of her execution. at a building that is now known as the Queen's House.
And it was built for her by King Henry VIII.
Yes, it was.
Because at one point he did love her.
Yes. And this is actually, the location of this house is near the chapel where her body is currently laid to rest. Now, there's a story of a guard. It said that he saw a hooded figure approaching him in one of the rooms of the tower. And now, despite being ordered to stop, the figure advanced, leading him to run it through with his bayonet. When he did that, he realized that the figure was missing a head.
So she has also been seen carrying her head under her arm. Because if I had my head chopped off, I'd want to make sure I had it with me, because you might need it. Heads are pretty important.
So, and I believe that she's headless and running around, because there's a homeless man that actually was so depressed, I guess, that he went Fear Factory here in Utah. Actually committed suicide by laying his head on the tracks and letting the train run it over. Now, the first time that we actually went to Fear Factory, Peaches actually saw the spirit of this man wandering around the grounds of Fear Factory, and he had no head. So, in our experience, spirits look the way they did when they died, so it stands to reason, if she was beheaded, she's not going to have a head as a spirit. Which would be creepy as crap, if you ask me.
I'd have to agree with you. That would be unpleasant.
So the next on the list we have is Margaret de la Pole.
And I think of all of them, they're all sad, but this one to me seems to be the most sad.
I would have to agree with you. She died in 1541. Now, she suffered one of the most gruesome botched executions. Oh my gosh, I can talk. Executions in recorded history.
And it wasn't even really her fault. She really didn't do anything. She was just a scapegoat for her son.
She was. She was actually the Countess of Salisbury, if I am saying that correctly.
That's how I would say it.
And she was imprisoned in the Tower as an enemy of the state because her son, who was a cardinal at the time, denounced Henry VIII as the head of the Church of England. Now, he was actually in France, so King Henry took his rage out on Margaret. So when she was obviously sentenced to be executed by beheaded, and when she got to the scaffolding, she refused to kneel, and she said, "So should a traitor do, and I am none." Now, being that she was of noble birth, there was about 150 witnesses present when this all went down. When the executioner raised his axe, she started to run away. He chased after her, all hacking at her with the axe until she eventually died from him just kind of trying to kill her and cut her head off with his axe. Now, it's said that the screams of Margaret are frequently heard at the scaffolding, and some people have actually claimed to witness a reenactment of the bloody event while they're there visiting the tower.
It would be horrible. I have to give it to her. She's like, I am not a traitor. I'm going to run away. She was gutsy.
Out of the two, between Margaret and Anne Boleyn, if I were to see one of them, I would probably choose Anne Boleyn because I don't want to watch a spirit run around getting hacked to death with an axe.
Yeah, that would
just be weird.
That would be disturbing for sure.
So the next one on the list, this is from 1547. This, again, has to do with King Henry VIII, but this is his armor. There is a tower there called White Tower, and visitors say that they have a horrifying crushing sensation as they enter the gallery where the armor is stored. When they leave, that feeling all goes away. It's not there anymore. Now, guards have reported being physically accosted by some unseen force. One guard was even covered and strangled by a heavy cloak, only to find out that he was completely alone after he was able to free himself from this cloak. Now, another guard had stopped to rest his feet and removed his shoes when he heard a voice whisper, "There's only you and I here." Now, people are unsure if it's Henry VIII himself or if it's a malevolent being. They have no idea. But either way, it's not recommended to go into the White Tower by yourself. Honestly, as a paranormal investigator, we don't recommend going anywhere. It's when you're investigating by yourself, but in a place that's haunted as this, where there's so many tragic deaths, I wouldn't recommend going anywhere in Tower of London by yourself, to be honest with you.
No, I don't think I would. In fact, of all the hauntings and different TV shows I've watched and different YouTube videos I've watched, I don't know that I would go anywhere in England by myself. Just, it seems haunted as crap over there.
So now the next one that we have is actually two people. This is Lady Jane Grey and Guilford Dudley. They died in 1554. Lady Jane was actually the great-granddaughter of Henry VII. Her relatives actually convinced her that she was the rightful heir to the throne, and a group of men tried to put her forward as the rightful queen. At the time, Mary I, who was daughter of Henry VIII, she had a very different plan in mind. Now, when she married Philip of Spain and was crowned queen, she actually had Lady Jane and her husband, Guilford Dudley, sentenced to death. Now, Lady Jane, she was only 16 when she was executed. Her husband and a number of male family members were also scheduled to be beheaded. Guilford's remains were carted past the room where Lady Jane was actually being held at the time, and it's most likely that she actually witnessed this and knew that she was about to meet the same fate. When she got to the scaffold, she was actually blinded and had trouble finding the chopping block, and was asking, "What shall I do? Where is it?" There is a place there called I want to say it's Beauchamp Tower, and it is said that Dudley's ghost actually sits there and weeps well into the night. And there are also other claims that he is responsible for the word Jane that was etched into the walls, and which is still visible today, I believe. Now, Jane herself has been spotted in 1957 as a lonely figure walking amongst the battlements. I'm assuming looking for her husband.
See, when I was there, I was not really of the paranormal mind. I mean, I knew it was haunted when I was there. I'd read the stories back when I was in grade school out of my scholastic books. But when I was walking around, I didn't really have my ghost radar on. I was...
Ghost Radar Classic, you didn't have it with you?
I didn't. But
Ghost Meter Pro.
Even just my feels, I didn't have those on. And so I would love to go back with my ghost feels on.
I would love to somehow find a lot of money and go on a trip to the Tower of London with some of the people on the team.
That would be fun.
And do a incognito investigation.
I wonder if you could do a ghost hunt there if you contacted them. I wonder if they would let you.
Maybe you can look up another website and see if they say anything about it.
Maybe I'll send them a text.
Okay, so you should do that. Find out.
I'll find out. That would be fun.
And then we'll may or may not tell people. We promise a lot of stuff and we don't follow through on. We're bad at that.
I'm not.
Just kidding. We're actually, with the new direction we're going, we're actually trying to be more active on social media. But we're not going to get too much into that right now because number 7 on the list is actually Lady...
We still have 2 ghosties to talk about.
Yes.
3, actually.
3. We have 3.
Oh.
Next one.
No.
I've got 2.
2.
We have Lady Arabella Stewart, who died in 1615. Now, she was the second cousin of Queen Elizabeth I and married the nephew of Lady Jane Grey.
Oh, but she did it in secret, which was bad because she had to have permission from the Queen at the time.
Yes, I forgot that part. She married William Seymour, like I said, was the nephew of Lady Jane Grey. Now, this made King James I very angry. He saw this as a threat to his rule and had them both put in the Tower. They had actually attempted to escape, but Arabella's ship was intercepted and she was returned to the Tower. However, Seymour was able to escape to a place called Flanders, and unfortunately he actually never saw Lady Arabella again. Now, out of desperation, I guess, she refused to eat and she ended up dying in the Tower. Now, she's said to haunt the Queen's house as well, which is where Anne Boleyn is. The governor of the Tower that lived in the Tower there at the time from 1995 to 2006, he reported a disturbing event where his wife was violently pushed by an unseen force, so much so that it actually propelled her out of the room and into the hallway. Now, other reports say that she has been seen heartbroken and weeping on the grounds. Again, it's probably one of those things where, her husband escaped, she didn't. She was thrown in jail for simply getting married, more or less. So,
But back to that Game of Thrones thing, King James is thinking, you guys got married, your claim to the throne is legitimate
You're
enough
strengthened.
that it worries me, and so I'm just gonna take you out. So, being royalty back in the day wasn't really as cool as maybe it would be now.
no, I wouldn't say so. I mean, there was so many things like that where people are just like, you know what, I want to be the king or queen, so they would go to whatever measures they could to make sure that happened. It was pretty cutthroat, and this went on for hundreds of years.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So the last one that I have on the list
And I think this is the coolest.
it's the Royal Menagerie. It's probably the most bizarre ghost that's there at the Tower of London, and it's actually a bear. It used to live in the Royal Menagerie. In 1210, King John, he actually established the menagerie with a bunch of animals there at the tower, and they were used in fights for entertainment. This was very widely popular amongst the people.
Yeah, because remember, no Netflix.
Yep, nothing really to do.
So they'd be like, hey, let's go watch the grizzly bear.
So, I mean, this became so popular that actually, over time, all these animals that were brought in, eventually it just kind of transitioned into a zoo. So there at the Tower of London, it was pretty much a zoo.
And they even had a polar bear.
Yes, they did. They had animals from all over the place.
I would not have thought of a polar bear being in England in 1210.
Nope, I wouldn't either.
I would have said no.
Hey, when you're rich and you have money and you want to see animals fight, you're going to bring whatever you want, I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, true or false, there was a polar bear in England in 1210. I would have said false, but I'd be wrong.
Dun, 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 dun.
Oh.
Now, it wasn't until about 1832 when the Duke of Wellington, he decided that having animals at the Tower of London was a bad idea. So he actually moved and created the London Zoo, and that's actually still there today. But he moved all the animals to the zoo. Now, it's believed that some of the troubled spirits of the animals from years past still haunt the tower. Visitors have actually reported to hear cries of animals such as lions and monkeys at the tower. One guard actually claims that a spectral bear charged him, and when he stabbed it with his bayonet, it disappeared.
So, I'm sorry, being charged by any ghost is going to initially give me kind of a ooh moment, but you get a bear, a grizzly bear burrowing down on you, that has to be like actual scary.
I'm sure his shorts might have turned a couple shades of brown.
I may have wet myself if I'm ever charged by a grizzly bear ghost. And then I'll curl up in a fetal position.
So yeah, those are just some of the more popular spirits that have been reported at the Tower of London.
And the more famous ones too.
I'm sure there's many, many more. When you have this building is damn near 1,000 years old. There's with all the torment and torture and deaths that went on there, I would be surprised if those 8 spirits were the only 8 spirits that roam the grounds.
No, I'm sure there's dozens, if not more. I know, like I said earlier, I don't remember when I went there. I didn't have, I wasn't a paranormal investigator at the time, and I was interested in ghosts. And I knew it was haunted, but wasn't really feeling for that. But I do remember walking into the grounds, and it's definitely heavier in there than it is when you leave. When you walk out. It's definitely almost like you're breathing a sigh of relief. Almost, it's very heavy in there. I have read some accounts where people have gone there, and it's a paranormal phenomenon, and I'm sure it has a name. I don't know it right now, but they've actually been kind of transported back in time almost, because they'll look around and they say that they look around and everybody's dressed in period, and not just the people that work there, but like everybody, and it's kind of freaked them out. And they were there kind of back in time.
Kind of like the movie Somewhere in Time?
Kind of. And they said that when it happened, it was only for a minute or two, and then then they were back. But I think that's interesting too. That would be kind of cool to be there.
I've actually never heard of that before.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in the movie Somewhere in Time. They actually go into a little bit of that kind of happenings from a paranormal standpoint. It's part of the setup for the movie. Very, very fun movie. A little slow moving at the first, but I'd recommend it. It's a fun movie. Christopher Reeves and Jane Seymour. Hey, Jane Seymour. Not that Jane Seymour.
Different Jane Seymour.
Yeah.
So Tower of London, if you ever get a chance to go, definitely go. Even if, and if you're not interested in paranormal, you're probably not listening to this podcast, but even if paranormal might not be your thing, Tower of London is fascinating in and of itself just from the history. When you're there, you can take a little tour, and it will show you there's actually a little moat around it, or at least in one part, and it shows you the door that they would bring the prisoners in on the boat, and
They called it the Trader Gate.
yep, and it's really cool. I would highly recommend going there if you get the chance. In fact, it would be worth a trip just to go to London to see Tower of London. I would go there just for that. Although while I was there, I'd go up to Edinburgh and see the vaults, because I've been to Edinburgh twice, but I've never been to the vaults. Because again, when I was there, I was not really paranormal minded, and I kick myself now. So, Tim, when we go there, we'll go see the Tower of London, and then we'll pop up to Edinburgh and go to the vaults.
That sounds like fun. I've always wanted to go to Scotland.
Scotland is awesome. It's cold. I was there in September and in April, and it was freezing cold both times. And then you go in the hotels, and they have the windows open. I'm like, why in the heck do you have the windows open? It's 40 degrees outside.
To air it out.
It's cold, though. They probably think it's awesome.
September, yeah, sounds about right. It'll be cold.
Okay, so
They're a
really
little
quick,
farther north than we are, too, here.
yeah, really quick moat story. So when you think of moats around a castle, you think, cute water and fish and tadpoles and lily pads. No, they're gross. That's where they would throw out all their waste. That's where and if you look on a lot of castles, there's a little ledge, from the castle side going out. And on that little ledge, every once in a while there'd be a hole, and that was your bathroom. And so you just go to the bathroom in the hole, and it would go into the moat. Moats are gross.
They were disease infested on purpose.
Right, you don't want to fall into the moat.
Well, you don't want to go into the moat. Armies would get sick approaching those. I mean, they threw everything in them.
Oh, but can you imagine living there, how much they stunk? Of course, everything probably stunk back then.
Well, that's
They
the whole
weren't-
point of
they
the
wanted
moat,
to-
though, is like you're trying to keep people out of the castle, so you don't
Right.
want to make it this crystal clear water that looks inviting, like, hey, come swim in my moat. It's like you want, like, no, stay away.
Yeah, there was they were not a deodorized time. I would have had a hard time. I can't survive without my perfume. I have a
Just
stink.
imagine the cat in the background being a part of the show. That would be phenomenal.
I put it out once.
His name is Leo. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Leo, okay? We have a dog door. The cat is capable of coming in the dog door, and if nobody's home, it can get out. But if people are home, it will not use the dog door to save its life.
And it came in the dog door because I just put it out a few minutes ago.
No, we never let the cat in.
I know. I put it out, and
But it thinks that the dog door only works one way. When it gets super desperate, if no one's home, it will go out. But if someone's home, it'll meow at you until you let it out. It's really annoying.
That's awesome. So, I think we're good. Tara London, maybe? Yes, no? Thanks for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Supernatural Hour.
And listen to our next one. It's going to be super cool, too. I'm excited for that one.
Peace out, butterflies.
See ya.
later.
You've been listening to the Supernatural Hour at AdvancedParanormal.com. The Supernatural Hour is part of the Radio Ronin network found at RadioRonin.com. Copyright 2021 by Advanced Paranormal Services.